Next up, we have the owner of Robert Green Consulting, Mr. Robert Green, who will now inform us on how to get the most from your software. Please welcome Mr. Robert Green.
Good morning. How is everyone? You can answer back. You don't have to be quiet. In fact, I may ask you questions as we go along, so please feel free to speak aloud. So, Dubai is awesome. You guys are fortunate to live in a great city. Would like to do a little bit of discussion about some of the issues that I've been talking about for years and years. I lost the front monitors here just to let you know. That I've been talking about for years and years about the implementation strategies of making your software work better. I'd like to share a little bit of my background with you to see what we have in common, and I'll do a little show of hands and I'll ask you a few questions to get a feel for what all of you do. So it started out for me as being a mechanical engineer. How many of you are engineers and architects and designers and technical people? Almost the entire room. I decided to go out on my own and consult. It's actually been 23 years now. Thank you, got it back. And I focus on CAD standards and management. Now this has given me an interesting viewpoint of the landscape. So not only am I an Autodesk software user as an engineer, but I understand what it takes to make that software actually work. So let me ask you, how many of you are an administrator or a supervisor or a trainer or someone who works with other users? Quite a lot, okay? I do write a newsletter for Catalyst magazine. If you don't take it, you should. It's called the Cad Managers Newsletter, and I've been doing that for quite a while. And I was recently at Las Vegas for my 20th Autodesk University. I maintain a Facebook group, which you are welcome to join if you would like, and a website, and there's my email address. So please be in touch. I'm happy to hear from you. What we want to talk about today is this problem. Am I really getting the most that I can from my software tools? Or if we talk about that from a business owner's perspective, they will say things like, am I really getting the most I can from my software investment? It kind of depends on your perspective, whether you're thinking about things from a user's point of view or a manager's point of view. But let me just share with everyone what I hear from every management staff that I ever talk to about their software. I always hear this: we've spent lots of money on these tools. We've tried to keep everything as modern as we possibly can and keep up to date, but we're just not getting the productivity that we thought we would get. And we don't know why. Very common talk track that I hear. So what I'd like to do is dive a little bit into that and analyze why, and give you some strategies and some ideas for breaking through those types of problems so you can get the most from your software tools or investment. So the first thing that I do when I talk to these management groups is I ask them the question: how carefully have you thought through how you're using your software? How carefully have you communicated that strategy to your teams? These would be your project managers, your software users, your engineers, your architects. How much do they really know about how the tools work and how we can use the tools optimally? And what I tend to find quite a lot of is that management has one idea about how technology will work. Users, in reality, see it working in a very different way. Let me ask you this question. How many of you think that your senior management teams really understand all the software that you are using as a user? And this is where very few hands go up. If you look around the room behind you, you guys in the front, you'll see almost zero hands. So what we need to do is we need to enlarge this conversation so that users and managers understand one another, and the entire company has a cohesive strategy for using software. And I would start out here. In order to get the most from your software, whatever that is, and I would point out, I don't care what that tool is. In order to get the most from any tool you're using, whether that's Revit, whether it's Inventor, whether it's a stone tablet and a chisel, you have to have the best, most modern tools that you can have. You have to manage them well. You have to train people how to use them. And the people that work for you have to be motivated to work with those tools. If you're missing any one of those components, you will not get the most from your software investment. I've found this to be true over the 25 years that I've been working with Autodesk software, and I find it to be just as true with Revit as I ever did with AutoCAD. And by the way, it's exactly the same phenomenon you saw on the drafting board. Does anybody in here remember a drafting board besides me? All right, I date myself, but that's okay. So let me just first throw out a few things that I think should be taken for granted, but I'll just define them anyway. You have to keep your tools up to date. Now, I go into places where I see versions of AutoCAD that are 10 years old. And I hear complaints from management staffs. We're having trouble interfacing our tools. We're having troubles driving our automated machinery equipment or CNC things out on the shop floor. And I say, well, what software are you running? And they say, oh, we're using AutoCAD 2004. And I said, well, do you think that might be part of the problem? Autodesk gives you a way to keep your software current. It's called subscription. And it works in different ways, whether you're on cloud products or whether you're on perpetual licensing. But my point is, if you don't have the latest software, how are you going to be able to take advantage of the latest features? You can't. So that would be recommendation number one. As you keep your software up to date, you have to constantly be aware of what the new features that you can utilize are in the software and implement those as they make sense. More on that in a few moments. You then have to figure out how best to use those new features, and you have to make standards. So how many of you have standards for the way that you execute your projects? You look around and there's quite a lot. This is very interesting in the BIM field, by the way, because it's brand new technology, so we really haven't exactly figured out how we want this to work yet. So standards, very important, but once you do figure out the best way to use your tools, you have to standardize the usage of those tools, and then more importantly, you have to train your users how to work that way. Those of you who are CAD administrators, have you ever written down a procedure and told people, this is our new procedure for using the software, and then you send it to them, and then what happens? Many times nothing. Users don't read them, they don't utilize them, and that's reasonable because you're asking them to use a brand new piece of software and a brand new feature that they don't know how to use. What's the answer? Training. So you have to standardize how the tools work, and you have to train people to work that way. That gives you the best flow for your project. So I would wrap up this section by saying, maximum productivity with your software is not just an accident. It doesn't just happen. It occurs because you plan, analyze technology, standardize your approach to get the greatest efficiency, and then teach people how to use it. I like to call them smart methods. There's nothing patented about that phrase. It's just the smartest way to get your job done given any given project. Now, let's move forward from here. Great, so we throw out these ideas, but how do I actually do that? Reasonable question. So let's talk about some strategies we can actually use when we get back to the office. And as we talk about these, I'm going to be giving a user perspective, and I'll also be giving something like a CAD administrator, project managers type perspective as we go along as well, so that I'm aware we have different audiences in the room. So I'll try to point out how everybody can utilize that. Well, let's start here, and this sounds really weird at a software conference, but tools in and of themselves do not necessarily guarantee results. Now here's what I mean. If I am a construction firm and I've been using AutoCAD for the last 20 years, and we say, well, I want to start using BIM now. So I just write a check to Autodesk and my software shows up. Does everything magically work? Why not? I heard someone say no. We have to figure out how to use it, right? I mean, it doesn't just magically happen. So tools do not necessarily equal results. It's not going to happen just because we buy a new piece of software. Now let's look at an interesting example here. This is the Lotus Riverside complex, and I don't know how well you can really see that graphic, but there's a building in the background, and in the foreground, there's a twin building. And do you notice what's happened to that building? It's fallen over. This building was constructed through the 2007-2008 timeframe using the most modern and available tools at its time. Yet what happened? It fell over. So does having modern design tools necessarily mean that your project will work? No, not unless you manage the product effectively, right? Does this make sense? Let's look at one other example. Was any BIM used on this project? The Sphinx, the Great Pyramid at Giza, these are 4,500 years old, approximately. Still standing, absent a little bit of erosion and effect from acid in the environment. We don't really even know how they did this in all reality, but what we do know is that they were very strong at project management, they were very strong at looking at quality, and they had a plan. And this allowed them to achieve unbelievable things with very limited tools. So you can achieve great things with primitive tools. You can have extremely modern tools. And if you don't have a plan or a strategy, it may still not work. But here's where it gets interesting. What if you had a great plan and a great strategy and great tools? What could you do then? That's where the magic occurs. So what do software tools really allow us to do? They allow us to accelerate our design process. Now, I think if we used BIM and we did scheduling and critical path analysis and we did all the necessary things that we need to do in a modern project, I bet we could build that pyramid a lot faster than the Egyptians did 4,500 years ago. With modern tools and great project management, we would achieve great things a lot faster. So we can perform tasks, design things in virtual space, which allows us to not have to prototype as much, not have to test as much. We can get things done faster with the modern tools, and that's what smart businesses are doing. Incidentally, I think that's what drives BIM. So when I talk to my clients, the number one thing they tell me about BIM is it allows me to find clashes, interferences, and problems inside of the building that I used to find in construction. So that's what the tool is really doing. That's what we need to look for. So we're going to talk about these accelerators here in more detail in just a moment. But these accelerators only work if we manage the project well and we know how to actually use our software and train our users to do it right. I think this makes sense, so let's go ahead and hop into this. I'd like to, and I will give you the title of the book later, but I'd like to give due credit to an author named Jim Collins. He's written a couple of great books that are called Good to Great. A lot of these concepts that I'm going over are actually things that he talked about in a business context, and I found them extremely useful in managing software. So just, and I'll give you the title of that and the author again towards the end of the project. So when we talk about technology accelerators, what are we trying to do with our business? Let's think about this. If we are hired to construct a building, we're given a certain amount of money to construct the building, and we're given a certain amount of time to bring that project to completion. Does the owner of that building tell us what our process will be? No. They might, however, tell us what our software will be. If they dictate to you, we will expect deliverables as a Revit model, then I have to deliver that project as Revit models. So I may have tools dictated to me, but I will not have process dictated to me. Almost always, that's true. So what we want to do is we want to look for ways to use the software in ways that can speed our project execution up. Well, how do you know what features inside of Revit or Inventor or any other software tool to actually pursue? Reasonable question. Where are these accelerators? The things that speed up your business process, the things that serve your clients well, the things that tend to increase quality. Let me give you a few examples, good and bad. If I am now able to model different building systems inside of a building shell, and I'm able to coordinate those systems and make sure that they don't run into each other, is that going to save me time later? Chances are. So that will accelerate the execution of my project. Will that make construction go more smoothly and make my client more happy? Yes. So this is a good thing. Will it increase the overall project quality and decrease my rate of project error? Yes. So this, for example, is exactly why I'm looking at clash detection inside of BIM. Now, if all it lets me do is generate a pretty picture, and my users don't know how to actually model and coordinate the systems, and we don't actually get valid clash detection, is that really helping me? Not really. See the difference? And that's process and it's training that really allows you to capture that. How do you know which features in a software package to avoid? Well, if it's so hard to use that people will simply skip over it, then it's probably something you could skip. If you cannot train it, then people will not use it. And here's a real good tip for CAD administrators. If it's too hard for you to figure out, chances are it's too hard for everyone else to figure out as well. So complexity is a problem, and it's something that I would avoid. If I have a feature set or something inside of a piece of software that I cannot adequately communicate, then people will make mistakes, and here's the worst part. I can have 5 different people make 5 different mistakes, which will cause 5 different problems inside of the project, which will now create things that I have to clean up. This is not speeding me up, it's not helping, it's not increasing quality, so I'm going to skip it. Does this mean that I am necessarily using every new feature inside the latest release of any given software product? No, I'm only using the ones that make the most sense. Sometimes, on a tight timeline project, you almost have to untrain people to train them the right way. I see a few people nodding, so you know what I mean. If a new feature would undo existing processes and cause great confusion in implementing the new process, maybe it's not worth it. This is for you to look at and analyze with your own users and within your own design teams. I let you make that decision. Anything that is unduly difficult, unduly disruptive, unduly hard to train people probably won't work well. So let's skip it. What happens when I get the new release of the software that my clients are working with? I immediately install it. I immediately start looking at the new features. I read the new feature guides. I look at everything that I can on blogs, and I try to figure out what new features are going to work for us. I immediately hone in on a short list of those new features, and I start testing to see what's going to make sense. I will also rather quickly figure out which new features do not make sense, and we will skip those. You can do this as CAD administrators or BIM managers pretty quickly and decide what new features you will send out to your users. This will allow me to adjust my training and standards as necessary so that every year or 2 years or however often you update your software infrastructure, you will use the best features that accelerate your business. It is worth your time to do this as a company, as a team, as an administrator. There's always a temptation to skip it because it takes time. Don't skip it. Very, very valuable exercise that you want to run through. So no matter what software tools you implement or use, make sure that you pick the functions inside of it that give you speed, quality, and standards. Focus on those 3 things and you will do better design and you will execute better projects with fewer errors. And I don't know about anyone in this room, I have never been yelled at because my project went quickly and with no errors. Has anyone ever had that experience? I never have. Focus on fast, trainable, standard, speed, quality. Now, as we evaluate our new software and we find these technology accelerators, what starts to happen is people want to know what's in the new software. They're curious. They're reading the blogs. They're looking at things just like I am. So what I want to do is take advantage of that natural curiosity that most users have, and I want to start making sure everybody knows about the new things that we're going to be looking at and implementing on our next project, or next year, or whenever that is. This makes new software exciting. It makes it a challenge, and this is a very different psychology than saying you will use this. Because when you take something that people don't understand and you say you will use this, the emotion is fear or avoidance. Has anyone in this room ever talked to someone who's just scared to death of trying a new software package? I have. You have people who are dragging their feet on learning Revit. Don't take my AutoCAD away, please. I know it very well. These types of phenomena go on all the time, and I notice that's global. I see no difference in people in any country that I've ever been in. It's always the same. So let's talk about these exciting technology accelerators, and let's let people know about it and let them get excited about it ahead of time. Maybe then they can read ahead. Maybe then they can start thinking about how they'll use it. And rather than fearing the unknown, they can't wait for what's new. It's psychological, but it really does work. Now, I'd like to talk about a concept that I call mission. And I think you'll see what I mean when we hop into this. And the air is really dry here. Really, really dry. Okay. The tools that we have, software-wise, let's just say Revit. By the way, are most people in here BIM construction? Architecture, engineering, construction? Okay, so I'll just use Revit as a contextual example. The tools do not define the mission. The mission defines how we use the tools. What does he mean by that? Well, your job description as an architect or an engineer is not come to the office today, play around with Revit, and if you find something that you like, let me know. Does anyone in here have that job? I don't. Here's what my job is. We have to design a building. The design has to be done by this date, and we have to turn the building plans over as Revit models. That's the mission. Now, we have to figure out how to use the tools to achieve the mission. And that's very different than just saying, well, we've bought BIM, so now we're expert BIM users. No. We have to think about how those tools will be used inside of our business. And now let me give you a couple examples of mission. Before I talked about the very modern building in China that fell over versus the very primitive building in Egypt that's still standing. Let's look at a technology example and bring something a little bit more into modern times, even though this may still be before many of you were born. This is the Apollo Saturn V moon rocket. It was first flown in 1967. So it's been quite a while. Actually, I think it was 2 days ago was the last anniversary of the last moon landing. I'd like to tell you about the computer that they used to get to the moon. There it is. This thing was 700 by 250 by 150. It's actually millimeters, not centimeters. It weighed 35 kilograms. Here's the specs. It had 2K of RAM. It had 38K of storage, and it ran at 2 kilohertz. That is 0.0000002 gigahertz. And what mission did this computer do? It went to the moon. Pretty cool, huh? Now, did anybody come to NASA and say, I want you to build me a 700 by 250 by 150 centimeter, 35 kilogram computer with these specs? No. They said, we need to get this ship to the moon and back without killing anybody. That was the mission. Now, figure out how you can build a computer that will execute that mission. So do you see how the mission defines the tools? Let's look at another example. Anyone recognize this? That's an iPhone. Now let's talk about the level of computational power that's in there. 64 gigabytes of storage, a gigabyte of RAM, a 1.38 gigahertz dual-core processor. Small, light, 1,000,000 times more computational power than what took the Saturn rocket to the moon. What's the mission most people use these phones for? Posting selfies. Does that, right? Do tools guarantee a great mission? Apparently not. Apparently not. But a great mission statement combined with adequate tools will yield an awesome project. Does everyone see what I'm driving at? Conclusion. Just because you have software doesn't mean your project will be a success. It will only be a success if you define the project correctly and use the software accordingly. Now, missions motivate people. And this is one very interesting thing that I have a great amount of curiosity about because I train people. So what I'm always looking for is, how do you make someone want to learn? How do you make them want to use new tools? And not only just use them like, yeah, I'll use it, but I mean use it like, show me, how can I do this better? How can I ignite that spirit in people? How can I get people on my project team to feel that way? Because if I can, I guarantee you I'll get the most out of my software investment because they'll be great software users. And by the way, I know that I'm speaking to some extent to CAD administrators, but if you're not a CAD administrator, I would say this. The only difference between me as a CAD BIM manager and a general user is that I have simply continued to be exuberant and curious, and I have pushed to learn. If you do it, you'll find the same results. Your career will advance. So I think these ideas are applicable for everyone. I challenge you to think about your career that way. We can achieve things that we never thought we could. Here's a few examples. So what I hear companies say a lot is, we're going to start using Revit. Great. What for? How is that exciting? If I've been working in this company for 20 years and I'm extremely at expert status with AutoCAD, and they now say, that doesn't matter anymore. I'm going to give you Revit tomorrow. What's running through my mind right now? I don't know how to use Revit. This might be threatening to me. Maybe this will be hard to learn. That's scary. Here's what that company should be saying. We're going to become the best, most customer responsive, fastest, most notable AEC firm in our area. We're going to have great projects, great teams, great project managers. Oh, and by the way, we're going to use Revit to do it. How do I get my people excited? We're going to go to the moon. Right? We're going to have an exciting mission. They'll now figure out how to use the software optimally. Now, it is important to acknowledge a few things, which is, if we are going to totally change the way we do business, we are going to have to train everybody. This is going to be difficult, and it is going to require work on everybody's part. I acknowledge that. But the training and the experience we gain will be worth it because it will make our company better. It will make all of our jobs more secure, and every project we execute will be higher quality so that 2 years from now, everybody wants to hire us. Is that good for your career? Yes. We will find better ways to work. And we will do great things as we train and learn. That psychology makes people want to use their software better. It really does. Now, you cannot just do this once. You have to be persistent about it. So persistence is a key attribute of companies that get the most out of their software. A company that says, that was a great project, okay, we're done. They executed a great project, but they're not going to get any better next year. Here's the better way to look at it. That was a great project, but how are we going to do it better next time? If we can do that, we're in good shape. Conclusion. So am I supposed to be done now, or why did the lights go up? Yeah, okay, all right. Give your team a mission. We're going to become the best firm at what we do. We're going to use Civil 3D in better ways and faster and execute better projects than anybody else in our region. Give them their going to the moon mission. Get them excited and watch them use the software better. Challenge people and watch them respond. But if you simply dictate to people, they typically don't respond. Want to get the most out of your software investment? Challenge people to become better users. Watch what happens. It's a very different psychology. It really does work. Now, do I advocate that a company that is using AutoCAD at present and that wants to fully implement BIM, let's say, over the course of the next year, do I advocate that that company throws all their AutoCAD away tomorrow and puts BIM on everybody's machine and they go 100% BIM tomorrow? No, I do not advocate that, because that will be a disaster. You cannot change the way you work overnight, but you can change the way you work overnight gradually. So now that we have a mission and we know what we're trying to accomplish, we have to figure out a way that we can accomplish it over a gradual period of time so that the projects we're in the middle of still get done, but that we learn new technology as we go. And that's hard. If you could stop your company right now and not have to get any project work done for a couple of months, then it might be a different thing. But none of us have this luxury. We have to keep projects going. So we have to figure out how we can implement software at the same time that the company is working on other jobs. Now, I call this the changing the tire on a rolling car problem. If you think about trying to change the tire on a rolling car, it's exceptionally difficult, but a company that's going from AutoCAD to BIM is essentially doing that, because you cannot stop the car to implement or to change the tire and implement the new technology. The technique that I recommend for doing this, I call it pilot projecting. So we can look at a test pilot, it turns out, is a very good analogy for this. So if we're trying to develop a radically new aircraft, somebody has to be the first person to fly it, and there's a chance that it may crash, or that the development of that new plane may not go as smoothly as we'd hoped, but somebody has to be the first person to figure this out. So that's what a pilot project, test pilot project, is all about. So my question to everybody in this room is, are you a test pilot? Do you have the mental attitude that it takes to go onto a new piece of software, figure it out, figure out the best way to use it inside of our company, and yes, go through the errors and the false starts that you will go through as you implement new software tools? Has anyone in this room ever brought a new piece of software in and installed it perfectly and never made a mistake? Is anybody going to raise their hand? I think I saw one. Yeah, maybe two. Well, you're better than I am then, because I never have. Here's who your test pilots are, by the way. If you are a self-learning, hard-working person who enjoys a challenge, you're a test pilot. Companies, managers out there, do you know who your test pilots are? Maybe. You can ask. What I would do, I hit the button too fast. What I'm trying to do here with my test pilots is I'm trying to say, we're going to be doing our first BIM implementation project where we actually collide civil 3D models, infrastructure, gas lines, water, whatever you have going on underground. We're going to now collide that with a building that's going in. This is the first time we've done it. We honestly don't know how this is going to work. Who would like to volunteer to figure this out? You wait and you see who raises their hand. You train those people and you work through the project, and may I say, please allow extra time. If you think this project should take 4 weeks, maybe you should budget 8 weeks, because you're figuring out new software and it will take extra time. But get your test pilots to go through that process. Here's the thing that's very interesting about when they have test pilots fly new planes. As soon as they land the plane, which hopefully they did, but as soon as they land the plane, they pull the pilot out, they talk to the pilot, they say, what did you notice? What did you experience? What worked well? What didn't work well? What would you change? Is there anything we can do to make the aircraft easier for you to fly? How might that work in a software environment? Once you have gone through this initial test project, you ask the users, what worked well? What didn't? How should we standardize the usage of this software? How can we best coordinate our civil 3D environment and staff with the people over here in architecture who are using Revit? You will discover ways to do this. Write it down, optimize it, then standardize and train again. That was one of the very first things I mentioned, right? Standardize your approach, train your people. So what I'm saying here is that this keeps happening. Every new project you do, every new technology you integrate, every new piece of software that comes into your business, somebody has to figure out how to use it. As they do, make sure to capture their knowledge, their methods, and turn those into your standards. Then you use what the test pilot learned to train everybody else, and your whole staff gets smarter over time. Does anyone in here believe that 5 years from now, we will be using the same software that we use today? I see no hands go up. It will be different. It will be. How will we deal with that? By constantly testing, evaluating, standardizing, and training. It loops, it repeats. It never stops. As soon as you think you have the software working, what happens? New project, new requirement, new BIM standard from the government. Something always happens. So you're never done with this. At least I've been doing it for 25 years and I've never been done with it. An interesting thing happens if you do this over time, and then we'll wrap up. One of the things that's very difficult to do in any software environment is to get people to actually work to standards and best practices. People are individuals. That means they have ways they like to do things. But the company needs to have a cohesive way for everyone to do things. That's the only way that I can have information that everyone can consume and use. And incidentally, I think this is one thing that makes BIM implementation difficult. because we're coming from an environment where we have one person doing one drawing. And now we're going into a team contributing model data that must be coordinated. We can no longer have renegades. It cannot be anarchy. It has to be controlled. So we have to get a culture of discipline installed. And if you look at a lot of the things that I talked about, I've been trying to implement that sense of discipline as I've gone along. And having this self-motivation, self-discipline type culture is the only thing that will allow you to succeed long term. If you define the right mission, do the pilot projects to prove the technology, communicate that to your users, and train them adequately, they will be so excited to work on new, cutting-edge projects that benefit their career, that make them more highly compensated, that give them professional status, that a lot of your staff will do whatever it takes to learn. This is always what I did. And I suspect, looking around this room, for people who come to Autodesk University, everyone in this room wants to do better things. If you didn't, you wouldn't be here. So you know what I mean about this sense of self-discipline. When teams have a mission, adequate software, and adequate training, they stay focused on accomplishing the mission. They stay focused on getting results. They stop arguing about how we should work, and they do work in the way that makes the most sense for the project. By the way, how long does it take to implement this type of psychology? In my experience, 1 to 2 years. So you cannot really just go home tomorrow. Now, I don't know where your company is in this timeline, but you can go into a company that is utterly broken, utterly in chaos, and go back there 2 years later, and it can be focused, controlled, standardized, and extremely productive. You really can change it. You really can. But it requires users, administrators, everybody on the same page. Only by doing this can you really get the most out of your software. Think about it this way. If my team has no structure, if nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing, does it really matter what software they have? It really doesn't. Conclusion. Where most companies fail, in my experience, is they do not adequately define what the mission is, and they don't really have a plan. They don't adequately train, they don't adequately standardize. Companies that don't do that don't get results. Companies that do great things. They become technology leaders, they're profitable, their employees are happy, everybody wins. I've made a few references throughout this presentation, and I promised I'd give you the title of the book. It's called Good to Great. The author is Jim Collins. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you look at this. This guy has an outlook on quality and getting teams to work that is outstanding. I've been using it in my consulting practice for the last 8 years, and it really does work, really does. Actually done a little bit early. Did everyone get a few things that they can use? Was this a good use of your time for 40 minutes? Yes? Okay, good. I thank you. I'm done a little bit early, so thanks very much for coming to Autodesk University.
Thank you, Robert, for sharing.